I'm coming at you live on tape from Sydney, Ohio. And today we're talking the most embarrassing thing Mick Foley said he ever did in professional wrestling. Now, the list is probably fairly long for embarrassing things Mick Foley did in professional wrestling. But this is what he called the most embarrassing. It is the Lost in Cleveland vignettes in WCW. Now, let me set this up for you. Mick Foley debuted in WCW under the Cactus Jack persona in 1991. He immediately started feuding with world champion Sting as a heel. Sting was the top babyface for the WCW world title. Then Vader won the WCW world title, and Cactus Jack turned babyface and started feuding with Vader. Now, Mick Foley came up with the idea to Dusty Rhodes, who was the booker at the time, to write him off with a fake injury angle to gain him some more momentum and some sympathy against Vader. So they had this injury angle set up where Harley Race removed the mats from around the ring, and Vader powerbombed Cactus Jack onto the concrete below. The problem was Vader worked stiff and Mick Foley actually got injured. He suffered a concussion and lost feeling in his foot. So the fake injury angle turned into an actual injury. So he had to be written off TV for a while. And it wasn't just a fake injury. So Dusty Rhodes had to come up with something for him to do while he was injured. Now, WCW at the time was hiring outside writers to come in and write some of their things for their wrestlers to try to make it more dramatic. And Dusty Rhodes got some of his ideas for angles and promos and vignettes from movies and television. So they came up with the Lost in Cleveland vignettes, which was Mick Foley having amnesia. Now, I thought when I was a kid, amnesia was going to be a much bigger thing as an adult, but I have not had amnesia once. Mick Foley, Cactus Jack had amnesia, and a reporter was sent out to find Cactus Jack. This was supposed to last for 12 weeks. The first week, the reporter, known as Catherine White — I know nothing about Catherine White, did no research on Catherine White. She probably was just some rando who worked for Ted Turner — went to the mental hospital where Cactus Jack reportedly escaped from, and it was mainly them making fun of people in a mental hospital, which in 1993 you could get away with. The second one, she went to Mick Foley's house, to Cactus Jack's house, and met with his wife. The problem was Mick Foley's real wife, Colette, Dusty Rhodes thought was too hot to be his wife. So they hired some frumpy-looking woman to be Cactus Jack's wife, which immediately soured both Mick Foley's real-life wife, Colette, and Mick Foley on the angle. Mick Foley didn't think this angle was going to work to begin with. So they went to his house and talked to his wife, who talked about how much she wanted him to come back home. The third angle, they went to a alley where he was supposedly living. And we met people like Swampy, who Cactus Jack supposedly talked into working instead of drinking all day because Cactus Jack was supposed to be a babyface. And we found who introduced us to Cactus Jack, who thought he was a sailor, only on land, and fixed little kids' bicycles, and not even Dusty Rhodes could convince him that he was an actual wrestler. Now this is getting into the goofiness of it. For the fifth segment, this went on for these were shown each week, by the way, each week on WCW television. So for the fifth week, they got Cactus Jack's fake wife and his real son Dewey go to the alley, and Cactus Jack said he didn't remember either of them, but he remembered sailing on the sea. And after that, some high-end executive at Turner decided it was time to pull the plug on these segments because they were just too stupid. And then Cactus Jack returned at Clash of the Champions and attacked Vader for revenge. Now, this was the biggest feud of Mick Foley's, of Cactus Jack's time in WCW, was his matches with Vader. And they just made kind of a joke of Cactus Jack during this whole Lost in Cleveland segments. Now, the original idea Cactus Jack and writer Mike Pruitt came up with was for Mick Foley to get hit on the head and think he was a different wrestler each week. Gradually, his hair would get shorter, he'd get thinner, and gradually he'd think he was a different wrestler each week. Eventually, him coming out with the spiked blonde hair and the face paint and thinking he was Sting, which would have been equally goofy, but it might have worked with Mick Foley's comic timing. Unlike him thinking he was a sailor and fixing children's bicycles, which he just was not into to begin with, which, I mean, it would have worked if Mick Foley was behind it. But Mick Foley was not behind it, and it was just goofy amnesia angle. As I said, Mick Foley has called this the most embarrassing thing he ever did in wrestling. And considering that list is fairly long, you can tell this was just idiotic. Vader would go on and feud with Hulk Hogan and get watered down and watered down and watered down till he was no longer a threat to anyone. Mick Foley would go on to become one of the biggest names in wrestling. Dusty Rhodes was Dusty Rhodes. I mean, everybody knows who Dusty Rhodes was. And as for WCW, it lasted about another 8 years. So those are the Lost in Cleveland segments. Now, I've got a list of things on my phone that I'm going to talk about gradually over the weeks. This was just the first of them. But if you have ideas, put them in the comments. There are things I don't think of.